know if y'all remember early 2023, but at that time, America had been set ablaze. Following the ever so divisive 2022 midterm elections, many folks were wondering what to make of it. Is democracy at stake? Are our rights being slowly taken away? And what's next? This blaze had evolved into a firestorm following the anti-Semitic comments made by world-renowned hip-hop artist Kanye West and NBA All-Star Kyrie Irving. Anti-Semitic attitudes from the past are alive and well in the hearts of many Americans, and arguably the most prominent black artist in the world openly admiring and praising Adolf Hitler is a problem. Kyrie Irving's comments are still inherently and deeply problematic, but there's a level of nuance in this dialogue. I had to put this conversation away because, quite frankly, this is one of the most heavy and difficult conversations I've ever had. We brought Black and Jewish students to the table, discussed the controversy, our perspectives as young people, and most importantly, set the narrative straight. So, without further ado, this one's a throwback, but welcome to a courageous conversation.
I know like bits and pieces about like Kyrie. So I know there was like a documentary on Amazon, I think it was, and I've seen later that like Amazon refuses to take it down, which is also a decision in and of itself. There's this like anti-Semitic documentary that's available on the internet that I think Kyrie watched and then was posting about it. I don't know too much beyond that, but I remember I've seen though like a clip of him that was like on YouTube of him in an interview where like it was like a pool interview, you know, like all the sports reporters were like around him holding mics to his face, and he just like had like cap down kind of over his face, like, you know, sweatshirt on. He was like so there was a comment that like I think kind of summarized it pretty well. It was I don't know who posted, like I don't know who, like, you know, the person behind the screen, but it was like, you know, dude's just putting on his white man voice to like appease the people, but he's not like really actually saying anything. He's just like kind of talking in circles. And like the clip was like, I don't know, 3 or 5 minutes long of him like not really saying anything. Like I was trying to listen for like, what's he gonna like, is he gonna really say anything about like his opinions about this documentary? Is he gonna say like, I'm sorry? And he just kind of was like, I don't even know how to describe that he wasn't saying anything, but it was like mind-boggling how he spent like several minutes just like talking, but like it didn't make any sense. So that's all I understand of it, is that he's obviously got a major platform, that he's got several literal and metaphorical microphones in his face. So
what I know about the situation was basically, you know, he was talking about basically like posting about like a documentary in a book that he had watched/read, and how he was talking of like the book essentially was talking about how, and I was telling Brian Hyde, talked about this with another friend, that a book was basically essentially saying like the Jewish culture was stolen from Black people. And I was like, yeah. And then he was just like, you know, like he was just posting about it, like, oh, this is interesting, you should watch, or like he was recommending it to people so they could learn, quote unquote. Um, yeah, I guess that's what he feels like he's doing. Um, and yeah, he was just like posting that on Twitter, and then people were like, oh, that's not anti-Semitic, and then yeah.
See a lot of comparisons to like, I mean, he essentially said like, I like Hitler, which is like
Yeah.
automatic no. But the alignment of like prominent Black media figures with anti-Semitic beliefs that are like very deep-seated, like we learned a lot about that. How do we feel about some of these ideas?
I think it's such a complicated situation, especially because it's coming from Kanye, a Black man who has been this idol to a lot of people in America, especially maybe Black teens in America, who look up to him and to think of him as this icon, created, you know, graduation. He did all these things to progress the field that he's in, and for him to slowly develop into this person who supports Trump, and then he went back on what he said, and now he's coming out and saying this, and it's, you know, people still support him you know, it's become this thing. It's not just like he came out all of a sudden out of nowhere and he said these things. It's like these comments happen slowly over time, and I think that's what makes it even more influential and even more dangerous. People see him as this person with a heart and a soul and someone they looked up to, and now he's saying these things, and that's what makes it all the more complicated and like I said, dangerous.
Yeah, to kind of build off that, as you know, as a Jew, as a practicing Jew, it's like terrifying, you know, because it's like major media person who is simultaneously getting deplatformed and is also advancing up the platforms. You know what I mean? For every brand deal that he loses, he gets more features on Fox News and like other conservative media outlets, and like viewership on there is like consistent and astronomically large. And so it's like, you know, it's like crazy. Yeah, like just touching on, you know, it's crazy how influential he is. And it's really scary because, you know, one of the first things he said was like, you know, DEFCON 3 to Jews, which is essentially being like, let's nuke all the Jews. And like, come on, that's like really scary. Like, really? Nuclear war? Like, we're already seeing what's happening in like Ukraine and Russia, right? Like, war is not pretty. Like, we don't want that. And I don't know, it's just really scary. And yeah, I don't know. I haven't been to Temple in a hot minute, but like, I don't know. It's just like, you know, it reminds me of how complicated relationship that Americans have with police, and, you know, we have police protection in our synagogues now because like people like to shoot up our temples and our synagogues, you know, our Jewish holy spaces. And so like people like Kanye saying these things is, you know, perpetuating anti-Semitism and is like encouraging, you know, the everyday gun holder to like, you know, use their weapon on people who, you know, are just people.
And I think a lot of times people, when it's said by an icon like Kanye, people a lot of times make it into a joke, make it into a meme. Oh, it's not that big of a deal, you know, people say these things all the time, they won't take it seriously. But the thing is, the more it's projected onto media and turned into this thing that's normalized in our speech, in our culture, in our ways of life, you know, then eventually when it reaches a point where it's serious and people are genuinely saying these things like, I don't know, death to Jews and Adolf Hitler didn't have, you know, opinions that were that bad, then, you know, it's become so normalized that people don't see it as scary, as bad anymore.
Yeah, kind of tagging off what Alexia said. When she said, basically, like, essentially, when people say this stuff in the media, people start to normalize it, and when things get normalized, the lines blur between like what is actually okay to say and what's not okay to say, and like people's morals get screwed up, I feel like. And yeah,
1000%. Like, you know, even as a Black person, you know, Kanye West has been like meant a lot to my childhood. He is like one of the only Black artists who grew up in a predominantly suburban space, a predominantly suburban diverse space, which is like a lot of the spaces that we come from in St. Louis. And to hear a rapper talking about mental health, like with Ye in 2018, to hear a rapper, you know, kind of going against like a lot of the traditional problematic, you know, ideas that were problematic at the time, like that was really important to me to hear. Like around 2016, I don't know what happened, but to see him come out and say these things, it is like not only incredibly hurtful as a Black person, it like almost seeks to split allegiances between these two groups who have historically the power structures have tried to split these two groups against each other in the past, right? And so it's really frustrating to see these things kind of play out. And especially to see Kanye go so far off the edge that like Alex Jones, of all people, had to tell him to stop, like, you're going too far. He's got a mask on. He's talking about Netanyahu and, talking about literally how he loves Hitler and how he read Mein Kampf. Like, that's unbelievable. Like, that's not nothing. Like, arguably the greatest hip hop artist, arguably the greatest producer of all time, going on a platform and talking about like how he wants to genocide like Jewish people. And he's running for president again too, which is not like, that's not nothing. And it's really scary.
The Kanye stuff, again, from like a Jewish standpoint, personally as a Jew, I'm going to speak from my point of view. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I'm a part of this organization that started in St. Louis, but is now a national organization called Student to Student. And a couple actually of our fellow CL Class 16 villagers are also in it. I think there are some current CL people who are in it too. CL people are usually in it. And it's this program where we go to usually Christian schools, but predominant like schools in the St. Louis area-ish, East Missouri area, really. We go to schools where there aren't a whole lot of Jews or there are no Jews at all. And there are usually about 3 to 5 Jewish teens who go to these schools and just talk about what it's like to be Jewish. Hopefully, usually we have someone who's Reformed, someone who's conservative, and someone who's Orthodox. Usually juniors and seniors, cool stuff like that. And so we talk about, life cycle of a Jew, what life cycle looks like in Judaism. We talk about Shabbat, holidays, other cool stuff like that. And the whole purpose of the program is to, educate people who are our age, what it's like to be Jewish, because, I don't know exactly where Kanye is getting these ideas, but I imagine it's just a lack of information, a lack of education. We were all fortunate enough to get a really awesome look at the history of, being Black and being Jewish and the relationship between the two communities, but not everybody has access to that. And so, this program has really showed me, just how many people there are out there, let alone, in our home city, that, don't know anything. I get questions all the time when I go to these presentations. One of the questions I got that I think about literally all the time is I was talking about how my dad was raised Christian and my mom was raised Jewish. And so this one person asked me okay, so your dad's going to heaven, but where's your mom going? And it's that perpetuating that idea of all Jews go to hell, things like that. And it's the fact that a kid my age said that to my face, but I don't think it was out of malicious intent. It was just genuine lack of information. So it's just there's but there's a difference between that person who was just confused, and then there's Kanye who I think to a certain extent kind of knows what he's doing, right? He's got major platforms. He's saying all of these things. Again, as Bryant said, Alex Jones was bro, chill out. At some point there's a line drawn between people just not knowing anything and then it being purposeful, and especially as we were talking about the influence that Kanye has had and continues to have is just so dangerous and really scary. And so it's that's why conversations like this and programs like Student to Student, where we just have conversations, get together and try and talk to each other, are so important, because as the media gets increasingly polarized, it's where can we find truth in any of this? So
Yeah, the whole Kanye, I've never really listened to his music. So it's just sort of been from an outside perspective, I'm seeing this guy who was so well known, so well respected, fall from grace. And it's been crazy to see just how quickly there's been a lot of weird change towards the end of this year. The only parallel that I can come up with right now is how Elon Musk took Twitter and immediately burned it to the ground. It's sort of like Kanye did the same thing with his entire career and name, and just the respect that any community had for him. He just took it and he burned it all to the ground. And I saw this one. I watch a lot of Hassan Abi now. And I saw this one video that he was commenting on where Kanye went on some interview with some guy who's supposed to be centrist or something like that. And at some point he asked a question like, is there anybody who you would trust to call you out on your bullshit? And it was like at that question, like it was sort of like okay up until that point, and then he just sort of like snapped. Like he went rambling on about like some like full anti-Semite stuff. It was sort of like that, like touched him in an odd way. So he's really at a point right now. What we're witnessing right now is he he truly feels like so alone. He feels like nobody is reaching. He feels like nobody is understanding him. When the problem is he has had so many people in his circle um try to tell him to like calm down or stop, but he's just it's just he's been seeing it all the wrong way, and it's really very unfortunate. And the worst part is the amount of people that are taking advantage of this for their own gain, um be it Nick Fuentes, or even just people just other talk show hosts on the right. um it has been fascinating to see as it progresses, like where each talk show host like pulls out and says, "All right, we're done. This guy needs help." Um, and that's probably one of the most interesting parts is when they say, "Okay, this guy needs help," because now they're actually recognizing that mental health issues, with gun violence and this Kanye West thing, they're recognizing that mental health is an actual real thing and a problem. But of course, if you try and say, "Oh, so you would say that maybe some socialized medicine, at the very least, on the front of giving people like easily accessible therapy or something along those lines." They're like, "The fuck no, this commie bullshit. What are you talking about?" So it's like, I don't know. It's the most obvious sign that they're a party of anti-progress on any front line. But I guess that sort of explains the name conservative. But um, yeah, that's those are kind of my thoughts on the issue.
But I wanted to get into some of the comments that Kyrie made. Now, as many of you know, he promoted a very anti-Semitic and hateful documentary entitled Hebrews to Negroes. But there's a lot of controversy on both sides simply because like there's a lot of Black people who are allying with Kyrie for the reason that the stance that the NBA took on him was to make him go through like a ton of training, like a ton of retraining and like a long process of like apology, which a lot of people say to be like a little bit too much essentially. But on the other camp, and I kind of lean towards this way, what he said is not okay, and he didn't take responsibility. And it promotes this anti-Semitic conspiracy of like the cabal of Jews that control everything, which like, how is that alive in 2022? But it is. And so him alluding to that and promoting that as a Black person, as well as Kanye, kind of creates this aura of like an us versus them mentality, which again, we discuss, once we start to fight each other, we stop fighting the system. So anyway, I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on maybe what he said, how you feel about it, and maybe the intersections of Black and Jewish identity that are at play here.
Oh, so me and Bryant, we talked about this. And I literally had basically had an argument with a close friend of mine about the situation. Um, because essentially she was like, "Oh, he didn't do anything wrong." And I was like, "Okay." Um, and so I just think really, okay, I feel like it's layered for me. The issue that I have with the entire thing and with like my community, some of my communities, um stance on this. People were like when other NBA players started to essentially be like, "Kyrie, you can't say that," or post that, people were like, "Oh, like you're selling out your people, da 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 da." And I feel like specifically within the Black community, there's like this mentality that like holding each other accountable means that you're not standing with each other. And I think we need to emphasize that holding each other accountable is lifting each other up so then we can be better as a community. Um, and I think that Kyrie, I just think what he did was spread misinformation, because at the end of the day, regardless of if you read this and, oh, I think this is interesting, you have to understand that with your platform, people are going to take what you say as Bible. People are going to take what you say as like, that's a law, like that's what's correct. And it wasn't. Like, this is like, that book was a theory. It was a theory-based book that was rooted in anti-Semitism. And so you can't just like share it and be like, oh, I recommend this book, like, because at the end of the day, whether you necessarily agree or whatever, regardless of the fact, like, you're sharing anti-Semitism, regardless of if you exactly feel anti-Semitic or whatever the case is. And so I think that really is the issue, is that like people are like, oh, well, what he said, he thought he was sharing the truth. Okay, well, like, it wasn't the truth. It was literally a theory. Um, and yeah, I also just feel like trying to tell, because essentially the theory is like telling Black people that we're Jewish, and that's like, I'm not I'm not Jewish. I know what I identify as. I don't identify as Jewish. And so I think that's another thing. It's like you're like sharing something that's like historical, but it's not accurate. It's just it's just weird. And I think um people with that much influence just have to be careful about what they say and what they do. Um, and people were mad about him getting all that training and stuff like that. In general, if you're especially if you're a Black person, you're just gonna get a different punishment than somebody else might get. Like, that's whatever people felt like that was bad. It's like, he did what he did and it was wrong. And he's also Black. So there are different standards that he's held to because he's a Black man. That's my take on it.
Yeah. And I also, like you said, I think I want to focus on being careful about what you say. I hadn't heard much, if at all, about the situation, if I'm being honest, but I think this applies to any celebrity making comments about anything. It's that people know in this day and age, you have to be very, very careful about what you say and what you post, especially if you're a celebrity, if you're an icon, people look up to you. People notice what you post and what you say, and cling on to every word of what you're saying and doing. And so if you're just going out there and just posting things like that, people notice that. People take that into account. People will read what you post and what you say, and just being like, oh, I didn't know, it was a simple mistake. Cancel culture, things like this, like, it has been going on for years and years. And so to say, oh, you just didn't know, like, that's just not true anymore. That's not an excuse anymore. Like, you need to be held accountable for what you do, no matter what, you know.
Totally. There's actually a major population of Black Jews. Most I don't want to speak too much about, like, I'm not going to speak for them a whole lot, because I will say I don't know too much, but I know there's like a major Ethiopian Jew population. There's a lot of Jews in Ethiopia. I know of at least one family who in St. Louis, who's Ethiopian and Jewish. And I imagine there's more in St. Louis and also across the country. So like saying kind of the idea that like Jews stole African culture is then like denying Ethiopian Jews like their whole intersectional identity, right? Like, they are both Black and Jewish, so both of those cultures mix. So it's like, bruh. The other thing too, just to like kind of debunk that from like kind of a more factual standpoint, like, Jewish traditions don't necessarily look like African traditions, right? And that's straight up like because of like geography. If you think about it, like, a majority of Jewish populations come from Europe, and obviously African traditional populations come from Africa. So like, you're comparing like desert versus like mountains and like different kinds of geography, and geography like influences culture, right? There's a lot of like candle lighting in Judaism, right? But like, as far as I know, there's not a whole lot of like candle lighting in African traditions, except for like Kwanzaa, things like that. Like, there's kosher rules, can't mix milk and meat, and like in certain other areas, like, you don't always have that choice, because like you have to eat what you have to eat, or like people just don't care about that, right? Like, they don't care about not mixing certain things because like that's not their culture, right? Like, there's so many, like, I don't our traditions, like from like Hanukkah and like oil and like things like that, like that kind of like our traditions about oil and Hanukkah come from like the stories that we're told about the story of Hanukkah. And same with Passover, like the food that we eat during Passover is because it comes from our stories about Passover. And so, at least from my understanding, we're not necessarily taking anything from Black culture. We're just taking it from the stories that we've been handed down. Right. And I mean, it's 100% possible that there were Black people involved at that time, or there were definitely Black influences, but that doesn't mean that our entire culture is based off of Black culture, because at some point, like, our culture just looks completely different from Black culture in certain instances. And so it's like hard to say that they're exactly the same, because obviously they're not, right? You know, I lead a very different life than Bryant and Niah because of cultural influences, right? And so, like, how can you say that I have stolen culture from Bryant and Niah when we just lead completely different lives? Like, you can't compare the two when there's nothing really to compare. You know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like that's like a convoluted way of saying that, but like, I don't know. It just like blows my mind at some point where it's like, I totally understand that there's like a whole, you know, narrative of people mooching off of Black culture, and 100% valid. Like, we have historical evidence of that. We have evidence of that happening in 2022. But I don't know. I think if someone presented to me the factual evidence of like Jewish culture stealing from Black culture, maybe I might feel differently. But I don't know. I'm not seeing it the way that this documentary and this book is presenting it. So I'm just kind of like, where is this information coming from? So
I know exactly what you're saying. And that's the really frustrating part, is like the pitting against, right? And like the media frenzy that has resulted from this, that is like, these people are objectively bad and these people's opinions are objectively bad, and there's no nuance here. But there's like so much nuance, and you've touched on like so much of it. But I think like one of the things you said about like the ownership of certain cultures, right? Like, there is no ownership in the way that we're thinking of it, you know? Like, the way we kind of visualize it is that this is mine and like it's no one else's, and like that's just the way it is. But I think that's why this training that we've had is so important. And that's such a difficult way of going about it, because again, it sort of pits these groups against each other, you know? Like, we are all suffering from oppression, right? But how do we get to an end goal in which those are like, we're not going to get there by fighting each other. I don't know if you guys heard, LeBron James came out and said something recently about Jerry Jones. Essentially, like, we went to Little Rock, Arkansas to visit one of the members of the Little Rock Nine, one of the unsung members. But Jerry Jones
She was the class right after.
Yeah, class right after. Exactly. So he was there discussing, like, Jerry Jones was present at one of the Little Rock Nine's days, like attending school or something like that. And he was like photographing a picture. Basically, he's like a big time NFL owner. And he's a very rich white man. But the media didn't really say anything about it. They were just like, oh, he didn't know any better, and just kind of moved on. So that's why I feel like kind of the nuance comes in. It's like, why is it only blown up when it's like two minority groups kind of fighting against each other? You know? Why don't we get these conversations when it comes to power structures that are ingrained?
yeah, I actually want to tie that into something else you mentioned that I was thinking about. Kind of, you know, dividing and conquering, that idea, you know, splitting minority groups apart. Also, when you were talking about that like sense of ownership, like, you know, one minority group can only own this and the other minority group can only own that. Now that I think about it, it's like so inherently like colonialist, right? Like, when the colonizers came from Europe to North America, they were like, this land is ours, despite the fact that there are already people here. This land is ours. And so like, that is one of the first times where like ownership became violence, right? Like, indigenous tribes before that didn't own anything. They didn't believe in owning anything. They thought, the land, we are just happy to be here. We are happy that we are able to use the resources from this place. And so we're going to share it amongst each other because that is our fortune, right? And then colonizers from the West come in and they're like, no, we're going to take this for ourselves. And so like, that idea of ownership goes all the way back to one of the original forms of oppression, stealing land, stealing autonomy. And, again, as we, if we want to break down systems of oppression, make sure that we are not letting minority communities be divided, I think we have to, in educating ourselves, I think we also have to remember the history of that too, of that's where those ideas can come from. And that's how deeply rooted they are, like hundreds of years.
Like you see the narrative of like the media is trying to control exactly like what you're believing and what you're seeing. Like they're blowing up Kyrie because they don't want him to succeed and da da da. And it reinforces like this idea of like, yeah, there's like this evil group of Jewish people at the top of every media corporation controlling and trying to disrupt Black voices. Like that is not the case. Like, why are we co-opting these centuries old ideas that are destructive to like all of us? And like you said, like, it's just misinformation. And like Niah and Sela, y'all spoke so well to that. It's just misinformation. And the degree to which we can be socialized with the things we hear and see.
I think what really just makes me upset about that is just like, we really can't, like, specifically just like people in those positions. Like, y'all have the resources and the ability to educate yourselves and to make sure that you're actually like speaking correctly and holding people accountable, and you're just not. And so I think that's really what's frustrating about it. It's like I feel like you're choosing not to be educated. I feel like you're choosing not to use your power to help others and to bring unity among BIPOC people, and people of different religions. So I think that's super duper frustrating. And I think that whole thing like, oh, Jewish people have an agenda against Black people. Like I was where did you like who said that? I'm just confused. Um it really just confuses me because it's like talking about, oh, there's just people controlling this, controlling. There's people of every ethnicity, culture, and power influencing other people. Like, it's not just Jewish people. Just because there are Jewish people in power doesn't mean that every single Jewish person has an agenda against Black people. That doesn't make sense. Um, and there are Black people in power too who are influencing Black people and who are trying to control Black people's career negatively. So it's not just Jewish people doing in power or whatever. It's not just Black people, it's everybody. And I feel like people are just trying to cause division for some weird reason, and it's just really frustrating because it's like this is how we need to become together, and people are just like not trying to do that.
And now, like we talked about, there is an argument to be made that, the leaders of some, like, Kyrie is an employee, and Jerry Jones was an owner, a rich white owner, and a Black employee, and like the dichotomy between how those situations were handled, so there is an argument to be made that, people at the top who are making the most money and who are making these decisions are overwhelmingly white, but that doesn't correlate.
Yeah, you guys are all really, I like all the points that you guys are saying, just about, like, it's very clear that it's not like it's not a huge, the huge issue is really just the powerful versus the powerless. And I mean, that's really just what it comes down to, for a lot of these issues that we're facing today.
Kanye West interview. I kind of wanted to get some like immediate feelings because I feel like we really haven't been able to process that. But like as a moment for our culture, we gotta process that. Like,
I'm not even gonna hold y'all. I didn't see it. I just like saw a post, and it was just like Kanye colon I like Hitler, and I was like, okay.
This isn't, I saw a different clip of, I've seen, yeah, quite a few headlines, but I did see this one clip of him that I thought was, I'm like, I don't know how to process it. He was, I think it was Tucker Carlson. It was a face-to-face one. And he was like, the number one cause of Black death in America is abortion because Black babies are dying at disproportionate rates. And I was just like, because part of me is like, like just like I don't like that's what I'm saying. Like I don't even know what to say about that. First of all, I don't really feel like I can say anything, right? I'm very clearly not dark skinned at all, so I'm like I don't feel like I can say anything. Um, However, as a uterus owner, like I can speak a little bit about abortion, and so I'm like, I'm like, oh, you're a pro-lifer. I see how that is. Okay. So I'm just like, God, like so confused. There's definitely some things that he said where I'm like, I know exactly how I feel about this. And then there's other things that Kanye said where I'm like, what is going on? So
Um, yeah, confused. um, confused. Based on that, which, yeah. Um, I think the what really just like makes it like that is like you're equating like infant mortality to abortion, and they're not the same, in my opinion. Infant, like they're not the same thing. Like getting an abortion is not the same as like infant mortality.
right, like
So
getting sick from something as a child, because especially because like we know babies are just like super susceptible to illness, right? Yeah.
like having a stillbirth is not the same thing as having an like, it's just like it's not the same thing. So um I think the what did you say, like they said like the reason for Black deaths, is that what they said?
Yeah, I don't know. It was or like number one cause or like one of the leading causes of Black Death or like I feel like there was a 50% in there somewhere. Maybe I don't know. It's been a minute since I saw that clip, but yeah.
It's just
That's the other
like
thing too is like where are the numbers coming from? Who's generating these numbers? Um yeah.
I mean, if we really want to talk about like the reason for Black deaths, we could talk about like the inequity in healthcare. We could talk about the food deserts. We could talk about lack of education for sex ed and people getting AIDS and HIV and syphilis. We could talk about a lot of other things. We could talk about how
Police
Black women
brutality, like it's a variety of things.
in hospitals. We could talk about all that. But you want to talk about abortions and how, like, what? You don't even have a uterus. Mind your business.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because he has 4 kids with Kim Kardashian, right? Or something like that. And it's like, dude, you're a father. You I don't yeah, I don't know.
Two girls as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. How does obviously we know that Kim does not see him in a super great light with divorce and everything, but it's also like, how does she feel about that? Right? She used her uterus, right, to have kids with him. And it's like I don't know, it's just very confusing and convoluted.
So Alexia just said he also had a situation where he had a public breakdown because he said he almost forced Kim to abort his daughter, which is unbelievable.
There you go.
I'm not even gonna
Um,
hold. I think like some stuff I will say when Kanye says it, I always take it with a grain of salt because I know mentally he's not balanced. Because like I remember he was posting all those text messages with Kim and Chloe, and then he was like,
Pete,
"You
yeah.
go to my daughter's birthday party," and they were like, "No, we said that we were having a birthday party over here. You wanted to have two. We just said have one." So like, I'm just like, "Are you?" Yeah.
like again, it comes down to the responsibility thing. He is very openly bipolar. So he says he doesn't have the depressive stages, but he certainly has he certainly, I don't say manic, but he definitely has the more productive stages. But when he is like in the depressive state, he tends to like just say just really, really reckless things. And as a Black media personality, like they eat that shit up. You know what I'm saying? Like they love it. But it's horrible because like again, there is a responsibility there that you cannot absolve. Like you are responsible for you.
Right.
And you can't really excuse it also because it's like he openly like doesn't take his like medicine to help with his bipolar disorder. And so when it comes to situations like that, with all the money that you have, you can find a medicine that works for you, and you're choosing not to do that.
Or, I will say for some people, medicine doesn't always work. But again, as you were saying, he has the financial resources to have a therapist or to have, he has the financial resources to find something that will, obviously, curing mental health and mental illness is not a thing, but learning how to manage it is
Yeah.
viable. And he has the ability to do that. I just think it's crazy how, like, since 2016, like, we've been seeing the GOP kind of like at first align themselves with Trump, right? And then, like, towards the end of his presidency, we saw like significant factions like starting to like alienate him and like separate themselves from him. And so it's like fascinating to see also, again, as we kind of talked about earlier, like these conservative talk show hosts, these conservative media personalities who are also kind of starting to be like, okay, hold on. Like, now, even people who hold similar ideologies to Kanye are also starting to separate themselves and alienate themselves from him. And I just wonder about, like, you know, obviously Trump was a firestorm, however you want to describe it. So I don't know. I'm just it's just really interesting to see the parallels of like someone who is like with the group is now becoming the out group.
I will say that when Kanye said what was it, like Death Con 3 or something
Yeah.
at that, like I wasn't what is it? Like I was shocked but not surprised. I think that's what people say. Because it's like right before that, he had did the White Lives Matter thing. And
Mm.
so it was like, I mean, for me, it's like if this man doesn't respect his own community, what makes you think he's gonna respect anybody else's? That's really what it was for me. I was just like, I mean, this man has been like basically like shitting on black people for like ever since he was like slavery was a choice. So like ever since then, I just like had such a low bar for him because like if you're gonna disrespect your own community, like I can't really respect you as a person. And so when he did the Death Con 3, I was just like, of course, it would be Kanye. It would be Kanye. And so it really just, I mean, made me sad because it was just like why, you know, um, why? But I wasn't surprised because of his like recent behavior.
I'm kind of curious, and let me know if this is like an inappropriate question. Like, as Black folks, how are I know there's like a major consumption part to Kanye, right? He produces music, people consume it. He's got clothing lines, people buy those, consume that. Are you seeing any like patterns amongst your Black peers or otherwise, in terms of like that consumption? Like, are you seeing people like not wearing the Yeezys anymore? Are you seeing people be like, I'm not going to listen to his music anymore? Or are y'all still seeing like, no, I'm gonna listen to it, like people separating the music from the artist from the art kind of thing?
Alexia just added, it's been
Mm.
hard to watch the Kanye situation develop. It's so complicated and difficult to pinpoint whether it's for media attention, the impact of his mental health, being a celebrity is just genuine malicious intent. There are many arguments that could be made, but there's no doubt that people turn to him as an icon, as the first in many ways in the industry and in the field. So no matter what excuse he might have, this has a detrimental impact on his fans and listeners.
If I'm being honest, I never really had many friends that were like huge Kanye fans, like die hard, like Kanye for life. But I have seen people who, this is not related, but like same thing with Nicki Minaj too. Like people are like, oh, like I've seen on social media, I was a diehard Kanye fan, Nicki fan, and I'm just like, I can't defend them anymore, type of thing. So I have seen that on social media. Um, I still see people wearing Yeezys, but people are like, I'm not gonna buy them anymore because like Adidas is like taking the Yeezy name off of the Yeezy, so people are like, I'm not gonna buy them. Yeah. So I've seen that, but I haven't seen anybody being like, "Oh, I'm gonna throw away my Yeezys because of Kanye." Um, his clothes, yeah, I don't really, but yeah, I haven't seen because I didn't have a lot of Kanye fans in my life. I feel like I can't fully answer that question, but based on social media, I've seen some people be like, can't defend you anymore.
It's really tough. Like I said, like I don't know if this is ethical, and I'm willing to have a conversation about it. But Kanye has, like, I think he is one of the greatest producers of all time. Like, if Michael Jordan went and said "I love Hitler," it wouldn't make him stop being the greatest basketball player of all time. But it's just incredibly frustrating to see like the descent into his lack of awareness and care for anyone, like, essentially other than himself.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I own several pairs of Kyrie Irving sneakers, but the fact that they won't take responsibility, it creates a dilemma for the people who end up looking up to them. Like, they both represented a lot for the emerging Black middle class group of Americans, and myself included, and they played a big role in like my growing up and my socialization. But to hear them be so reckless is deeply heartbreaking, and I'm just glad that I've been able to have the cultural training to be able to debunk these things immediately and really analyze what I'm taking in as a media consumer. Alexia says, exactly. For Kanye, I think I've noticed people who were huge fans support him up until this point, and now they've gone silent. As we know, though, silence still says a lot and makes those people still bystanders.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've uh, the whole separate the artist from the art thing. Me personally, I have a really hard time doing that. Like that's just might just be me. Some people can do it. Like for me, I don't listen to R. Kelly. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't be like, oh, culture. I can't do it. Um, and so it's like for me, like also like I don't really listen to Lil Wayne a lot, because of problematic statements that he's made about the Black community. Um, so that's just me. I just think I never was a big Kanye fan, but I really don't listen to him now. Um, because it's just like, dude. Um, so yeah, I don't like separating the art from the artist because it just feels like I'm still supporting that person. And they're still making money off of what I'm listening to, and what I'm buying. So regardlessly, I'm still supporting that person. Sela, specifically for you, have you like has there been any tension with your with any like fellow Black peers about Kanye, Kyrie, or like any of these issues?
First off, I will say I don't really interact with Black people a whole lot at my school. Mostly, there aren't a whole lot of Black people in my classes. It's kind of like as we know, like a systemic problem. I'm in mostly advanced classes, and my school is working on trying to fix that, where like, certain groups of people aren't being left behind earlier in high school. But um, I will say there's one class. I've got a couple classes with Black folks, but I haven't really had it come up with them. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. There's this one kid that I know, not Black, but I know he's really big into rap. And I don't know, I haven't really had a chance to talk to him about like what he thinks about Kanye. And part of me is like kind of scared too, because I have two classes with this guy, and so I'm like, oh, if I ask you about your opinions about Kanye, and like for me as a Jewish person, right, like his opinions are really harmful, and for you all as Black folks, like his opinions are also harmful, right? And so it's like I'm like, I don't know if I want to necessarily like engage in that conversation because like that just makes me scared,
Mm.
some hope. There was the other day in math class, some kids were like, I don't know, they were like barking. They were like imitating barking, and I think they were calling me a dog. I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't really hear them. I don't know. But anyway, and then I also heard them make a mask comment because I'm still wearing a mask at school. Um, and I was just kind of like really put off by that, and that kind of was really disturbing. And they weren't Black. Um, no. Yeah, they weren't Black. But the next time I had math, this Black kid who I went to elementary school with, but then he moved away and then he came back. He came up to me the next math class, and he was like, hey, like I tried to talk to them and like say like that wasn't cool, and like he was like, yeah, nobody gets to talk about my friend like that. And I was like, bro, that's so nice, like thank you so much.